So I've been making a lot of reactions to Australia recently, whether that's Australian geography, Australian lifestyle and culture, and I'm really enjoying my education about Australia. It's a country I've always respected and always admired even before making these videos, and it's definitely somewhere I could see myself living in the future. And a big part of that was the Australian people. They were super friendly, super welcoming. And I wanted to check this one out. It's called 15 Things to Know About Australians Before Moving to Australia.
Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're talking about Australians. What are they like? What should you expect when you move here? If you're interested, keep watching. Something that caught my attention when I first came to Australia 7 years ago is that people are very friendly. I never forget my first week here. I was walking down the street, completely lost, looking for the supermarket. And suddenly a very lovely Australian couple approached me and they asked me, "Are you lost? Do you want some help?" And they helped me to find the supermarket. And how amazing was that? I didn't ask for any help, but they just came and helped me. And this friendliness is also reflected in the fact that they love small talk. Believe it or not, Australians love to talk to strangers, and that's another thing that really caught my attention. When you're on the tram, for example, people just start talking to each other or they make jokes. For example, if you're walking down the street, someone might yell, "Oh, nice t-shirt." It's so amazing. And I feel that this friendliness is also reflected on the fact that Australians call everyone mate. Cheers, mate. Cheers, buddy. How you going, mate? Good day, mate. And yeah, it makes you feel good.
Good day, mate.
But yeah, I totally agree. That's the first thing I thought when I went. And what she mentioned about small talk and things, it's like the same when we went to Australia. We were talking to so much random people, whether it's in shops, restaurants, that sort of thing. And maybe when you're from Australia, maybe you just take that for granted. But for me, from being from Scotland, I feel Scottish people are very similar to that as well. Just love to talk, love to meet other people. But living in Asia, I lived in Malaysia, Thailand and China. It's very different. People are a lot more reserved. You don't really get that small talk. Although when you get to know people here, they're super friendly and super nice. And actually when you go, people are very respectful into shops and things like that. But it's a different thing, man. People are a lot more forward in Australia and a lot more friendly just straight away. So for me, coming to Asia is very different to Australia, but I love the Australian mentality in that way.
So yeah, Australians are super friendly, super laid back. And of course, in relation to that, Australians are also very formal. I'll give you an example. They love walking barefoot, even around the city. I saw that in my first week in Australia.
Seen that on another video.
About to cross the street,
just
and suddenly I had a girl standing next to me wearing a beautiful dress, but she was barefoot. They're so
How common is that?
And so free. And of course, informality is also reflected in the Australian slang and the shortening of words. For example, I'll see you this sabo, which means I'll see you this afternoon. I'm going to have brekkie now. I'm going to have breakfast now. The dress code is also very informal. Everyone wears flip-flops or thongs everywhere. Australians are also very respectful, and I talked about this in my video about Australian workplace culture. Australians are very respectful. They're always saying thank you, sorry, pardon, no worries, nice to meet you, please. In terms of respect, for example, it's considered super disrespectful if you go to a shop or to a restaurant and you complain about a product by yelling or swearing or insulting at the customer service representative or at retail staff. So yeah, this is a society that really values respect and politeness.
Yeah, see, and again, maybe if you're from Australia, you probably take that for granted. And I definitely took it for granted when I lived in the UK, when I lived in Scotland. But again, to compare it to here in Asia, no one says thanks for things. No one says, please, can I have something? They just I want this. Maybe the language as well just doesn't have that sort of, that function in the language. But for me, I've got a young son, so I teach him to say thank you to everyone after receiving anything. But you see other people, you see people who work in shops, you see people who buy things. It's just not their culture to actually have that respect. And for me, it's hard because I want to be super nice to everybody and super respectful. but you really don't get it back a lot. So that's again something maybe people take for granted in Australia, but it's definitely very nice to have that.
Another thing that you should know about Australians is that they make appointments for absolutely everything, whether it is to go to the doctor or to see a friend. I know that in some cultures you can just drop by your friend's house and say, hey, do you want to hang out? But not in Australia. Here usually you call your friends and you organize a time to see them during the week.
I think that's quite normal.
But you don't pop up unannounced. And speaking of making appointments, usually it's considered rude if you are late. So that's another thing. Australians really value punctuality and being on time.
Yeah, me too. I get super stressed if I'm going to be late for anything.
Personal space and greetings. Australians really love their privacy and their personal space. So this means that if you're talking to someone, you do so by keeping a bit of distance. Or for example, if you're in line, you keep a bit of distance as well. Too much proximity sometimes can feel a bit uncomfortable. And this of course goes for greetings as well. When you meet someone for the first time, you don't kiss them on the cheek or you don't hug them. You usually say, hey, how you going? Or you shake their hands. If you know them and they're your friends, you can give them a hug, and that's usually the case, especially with women. Guys usually just shake hands, even if they know each other. Also, when you shake someone's hand and this is the first time you've met them, you usually say, nice to meet you too.
Yeah, I think the personal space thing is a big thing as well. When I lived in Shanghai, trying to get the train after work, you're like squashed in the train like this again. People just, every inch of your body's pressing against someone. I remember getting like pushed about by old ladies and stuff to get like in and out of the train, man. It was just wild and it was very uncomfortable. I mean, it was an interesting experience, but not one I actually would like to do every
whether
day.
it is friendships or romantic relationships, usually take a bit of time to develop, and consent is something very important as well. You don't force anyone into an intimate relationship, and also bear in mind that both men and women are considered equals. Both people in the relationship have to be in agreement that they want to be with each other.
I mean,
If
I
you're
think that should be
invited to
normal, right?
someone's house here in Australia, the expectation is that you're going to reply, whether it is accepting that invitation or declining. But it is considered rude if you leave them hanging, wondering whether you're going to be able to make it or not. So always RSVP, that is, reply to that invitation. If you're invited to someone's house or social gathering and they say bring your own, BYO, this means that they're expecting you to bring your own drinks. And this is the case for almost any social gathering here in Australia. Most people bring their own drinks because alcohol here is very expensive. Many times you'll also be asked to bring a plate, and that means to bring a dish of your liking to contribute to the table, and everyone shares the food. So this is very, very common. In terms of the dish that you can bring, usually finger food such as sausage rolls or pies would be okay, or even meat for the barbecue, or
I think it's very good. It's like
also
very social.
Is very common in Australia.
Everybody
to have
can
a barbecue
contribute
at the park to celebrate a birthday or an occasion with your friends, and you'll see that there are many public barbecues all along different parks, and that's something that really love about Australia. And remember that Australians call barbecues barbies. Another very common social gathering in Australia is the housewarming party. And this caught my attention because it's not something common in my culture. But basically a housewarming party is that when you move into a new house, you host a party with your friends and you show them your new house, you show them the bedrooms, the living room, you have some drinks, some finger food, just talk. It's another excuse to really meet with people and socialize. Oh, and if you're invited for dinner here in Australia, dinner usually starts at 6 or 7 p.m. And don't be late. Remember that Australians really, really love punctuality. And if you're going to be late, let them know. In terms of food, Australians really love Vegemite, Tim Tams, smashed avocado, Indian food, fish and chips, Thai food, and any Asian food. Really, every time that I talk to my Australian friends and I say, what would you say it's a national Australian dish? It's very hard for them to really pinpoint.
Yeah, tell me what is the Australian dish, but that's one thing I like about Australia, quite similar to the UK, is it's not just like one cuisine that's popular. Like, we eat every cuisine. Like, when I was brought up, it was Asian food, like Italian, French, whatever. It's every type of food, you know. That's why a lot of people when they come to Asia, they talk about British food. They say like British food is terrible, and like in the UK you don't really have like good food. But in the UK, maybe similar to Australia, we actually like just enjoy every cuisine like just as much. Yeah, and I like that about Australia as well.
Typical Australian dish, because Australia is so multicultural. You'll find amazing dishes from lots of different cultures. You'd be surprised to hear, maybe not, but in Australia, kangaroo as well is a typical
I just heard that
dish.
in another video as well. Definitely
if you want to
try
dine
it now.
out, go to a restaurant. Usually restaurants close at 9:30, 10 p.m. and that's the latest. Which is really funny because I come from a Spanish culture and 10 p.m. is usually peak hour. Australians love their drinks, especially beer and wine, and they have a pretty strong drinking culture.
Yeah, Australian wine is very good
as
as well,
actually.
actually.
As well, why alcohol is so expensive here, because it's heavily taxed to discourage its consumption. Another drink that Australians love, especially here in Melbourne, is coffee. The coffee culture is huge, and the coffee is so good. Australians love environmental conservation. They really look after their parks and nature and wildlife. They're very environmentally conscious. Here, recycling is very common. For takeaway coffee, Australians usually use reusable cups, especially at work. No littering of the streets, parks. You always take a rubbish bag with you if you go camping, if you go hiking. There are very hefty fines if you litter. If you go camping, hiking, or you are in nature, the best way to behave is to follow the leave no trace principles. That is, don't disturb wildlife. If you find logs or dirt or flowers, just leave them in their place. Don't leave rubbish behind. Always take your rubbish bag with you. Playing music out loud at a campsite or at the beach is considered rude, but I'm going to make a video about the things that you shouldn't do here in Australia. So stay tuned. Another thing about conservation is that Australians are very conscious when it comes to saving water, because there are many droughts around the country. So being mindful of the amount of water that you use when you take a shower. The rule is usually a 3-minute shower. Australia is a very multicultural nation, and this means that they celebrate a lot of cultural festivities such as Chinese New Year, Diwali, and many others. Christmas in Australia is a public holiday, and Australians usually celebrate Christmas by having lunch with their family on the 25th of December. They don't usually celebrate Christmas Eve. The 26th of December is a public holiday as well in Australia, and this is called Boxing Day. Traditionally, this day represents a day when the rich give money and donations to those in need. But nowadays, Boxing Day is the day when most retail stores have huge sales on different products. Australians also celebrate.
I think this is very similar to UK actually.
December, and you'll see firework shows all over the country. Especially, of course, the Sydney one is the most popular one across the world. Fun fact: did you know that Australians are not allowed to set off their own fireworks? This is actually illegal in Australia. So if you were expecting to buy your fireworks, I'm sorry to say, but you won't be able to do that.
Do people still do
Day,
it?
this is a public holiday that takes place on the 26th of January, which marks the day when British colonies arrived for the first time in the Australian continent. But this is a bit of a controversial date, and many people, especially the young ones, don't really celebrate Australia Day anymore. Because this day also marks the day when Aboriginal or First Nations people were brutally colonized by the newly arrived British colonies. And there are more and more social movements that are calling for this day to be completely abolished or changed. So bear that in mind. Every time 26th of January comes in, there's going to be a lot of movement around the country. Something that you should know is that Australians don't usually debate about politics or religion. In many countries, including mine, debating about all these issues is very common, especially when you're in social gatherings or with your family over the table. You usually debate about these things. This is not the case in Australia. So if you're at work or just with your Australian friends, try to avoid these topics because it may make some people feel uncomfortable. If you want to find a topic to talk about in Australia, sports is your best bet, especially footy and cricket. If you don't know what footy is, this refers to the AFL or Australian football, and this is a sport unique to Australia. After 7 years of living here, I must be honest, I still don't get footy, but most of my Australian friends are crazy about footy. They go to the footy every weekend.
I would definitely be going to the footy all the time now.
I've been to 2 matches and I really love the atmosphere, and I think the beauty of this sport is that it's very family oriented, and because it's so family oriented, when you are there, there's no really aggression or violence, unlike other countries. People are cheering and they're mixing up with people from the other team, and there's no aggression. So I highly recommend going at least to one footy match and experiencing the atmosphere and what it is like to be there. It's a very, very big part of the Australian culture.
That's why I think I feel like this connection with Australia, because I feel like Australian culture is very similar to the UK. Like all of those things I feel can be applied to the UK, can be applied to Scotland with regards to like personality and that sort of thing. But for me, coming from the UK, moving to Asia, if I was to put myself in like an Asian person's mentality or someone who was brought up in Asia, this would be would be very different actually. So I can actually see it kind of both sides. Now, having lived in Asia for 10 years, I guess I feel kind of Asian as well. I have a similar mentality to people here in a way, and I guess that's one reason that makes me like want to move to somewhere like Australia. You can tell me if you're Australian what you think about this. Is it all true? Is there anything she never mentioned that's worth mentioning? Tell me in the comments. Thanks.